Welcome. I'm Travis.
And I'm Tyler, and this is Strategies for Success, a show that explores many topics while aiming to equip listeners with simple and practical lessons you can use in your everyday life.
Now join us on our journey as we reach for the impossible. Welcome back, guys. Welcome back. This is Trav.
This is Tyler, and today's episode we're going to be talking about knowing your audience. Knowing your audience. So that can mean different things for different people, but we're talking about when you want to communicate something to a group of people, or sometimes just one person. If you don't know them, if you don't know what they're thinking about, you don't know the type of person they are, it might be a little bit hard for you to communicate with them. So, sometimes that takes a little bit of time to build rapport with them and to understand them, but you can do a lot of that by asking questions. And so Travis and I both kind of come from a sales background. We get to communicate with customers and employees all the time. So, even those interactions with the customer is going to be different than interaction with an employee, because you're trying to get across different points and they have different understandings of things. So I've seen this in a lot of different ways. I've seen this done well, and I've seen this done poorly. But I know one that comes to mind is I've been to meetings before, or lessons, and people are saying things that a funny one we joke around about is using acronyms or using phrases or slang that the people that are giving the presentation, they know all about it, but someone that's new, they don't know what it means. So they could sit up there and give an hour presentation and use all these different slang and phrases and stuff. And if you don't even, the audience, if they didn't know their audience, if they have new people in the crowd or people that are new to this subject and they don't even know what they're talking about, they're probably going to check out pretty fast. They're going to lose attention pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very important to know who you're speaking to. I've learned this from, especially not only in business, but when you're talking to a customer, you got someone that comes in, they might think that you're being rude or disrespectful by just not understanding what kind of background or where this person comes from, different culture, but not just from business, but to traveling to different churches. Every church is a little bit of a different flavor when you go in from cowboy style churches to more modern inner city churches, to some that may be a little old school or a little more modern. When you go in, you're probably going to be a little outdressed if you walk in wearing a suit and tie, at a cowboy church. Know a little bit of your crowd, know what they like. If you show up serving ice cream and you have the wrong flavor, you ain't going to sell any, right?
Right.
So I think that as we're talking about know your audience, me and Tyler were talking about a famous country music group at one point that had came out against it was actually against Republican presidential candidate George W. Bush, and I believe it was his re-election term, who was highly popular, especially in southern states, and not understanding where is country music popular at?
Southern states.
You got it, right? So they're not looking at the red map as probably their biggest customer base that's buying their music at the time, buying CDs. And by coming out against this Republican president, their rating just fell off the chart. And you mentioned this, and I want you to come back and talk a little bit about this same group, but there's been several businesses that have come out with this new agenda, or maybe woke, and maybe that works for their clientele, but you want to make sure you know who your client base is, because you might be alienating your entire client base, right?
Right.
Tell me what you were talking about with the name change on this country music group.
Yeah, so they changed their name to, I guess, to a more politically correct name, and this was after the first incident, but, there's a lot of people that now make fun of them because they changed their name, and it's like now you probably know about them more from getting made fun of than you do their music. So at least that's the case for me.
Same here. I don't even know if I can name any of their songs, but we were talking earlier about people knowing their base, whether you love him or hate him. All right. President Trump seems to know his base. And we were talking earlier, how many presidents have you ever seen, Tyler, that have went out and drove the Beast or rode in the Beast around a NASCAR track?
Right.
I've never seen it happen.
Nope.
And you've seen flyovers, but I've never seen an Air Force One flyover.
Nope.
And I saw that he invited several football teams, the
Mm-hmm.
Chiefs and the Eagles. They invited them to come to the White House.
I think he was the first active president to go to a Super Bowl too, which I thought that was pretty crazy. I figured someone would have already been.
In a southern state, right? And so this guy knows his client base, and you think if he came out and he's like, I'm going to be politically correct, he would lose his client base, lose his whole political base, because what they like about him is he's like, enough with that and let's get after it. So let's talk in our world, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we know our customers? How do we know our audience? How do you find that out?
I mentioned it earlier, but you got to ask a lot of questions a lot of times. And once you've been around and you gain some experience, you can usually kind of put people in categories off the bat. I have made that mistake of assuming something about someone, and then that turns out to not be true too. So you got to be careful that you're, like I said, we come from sales. So sometimes or how you gather information is probably the biggest thing. You got to ask some questions, and sometimes you can do that without directly asking them questions. You can kind of throw some stuff out there and see if they bite, type of thing. But like one big example for us, we sell farm equipment and we also sell lawn and garden. So if I'm going to try to go out and sell a lawnmower to somebody, or I'm going to go out and try to sell a tractor to somebody, those are likely two different customers. They're going to be very different people. They're going to have very different things in mind. And so, a big thing that I've realized is a lot of people that are in the ag industry, they're probably using that equipment to make money or to, maybe feed their cows or something, but it's somewhere down the line, they're probably using it to make money. So they may be able to justify a higher priced item than somebody that's a homeowner and they're just buying a residential lawnmower. They're looking for different things. So you got to point out different points to them because different things are important to them. They may be a lot more price sensitive. They may be, they may not care about all the bells and whistles and comfort on things because they're just going to mow their lawn once a week for an hour or 30 minutes and then they're done. So that's a big thing of you got to know your audience and kind of develop your communication strategy and
How about
pitch off
this
of
one?
that.
You ignore the wife,
Yeah.
or you speak just to the wife and ignore the husband.
I actually had this conversation either today or yesterday about, we had a new sales guy and I was telling him about that, but I've made that mistake before and I feel like I've gotten better at that, but sometimes you can ask questions and if you start figuring out who takes over the conversation, the husband or the wife, and you can usually figure out who the decision maker is pretty quick. And so I always try to pay attention to both of them because I feel like that's just common courtesy, but you'll start to realize, if they start asking questions, if they take over the conversation, they probably have a little more pull. They probably have a little more pull in making the decision. So you kind of got to shape your pitch to them and maybe come up with the pitch to answer their questions more than the other person.
Like if you're talking to a couple, if you have the husband sitting on it, but the wife is the one that mows all the time,
Right.
her main issue is probably not cut quality, but how comfortable the seat is.
Yep.
And his main issue might be the cut quality because that's what he sees. That's how he experiences the new product.
Might be a cup holder.
Exactly. Exactly right.
I'd have a cup holder for their.
I'll tell you a really neat story. When I hadn't been in sales very long, and I had a guy come in and he looked pretty rough. And everybody does it. Everybody makes that first impression. You make a judgment call. You think you know the person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this guy came in and he goes, I want to buy 3 utility vehicles. And I was like, yeah, I bet you do. And this guy, he looked like, and I don't mean to be disrespectful and I'm not trying to be rude, but my first impression was this guy literally looked like he'd been holding a sign on a street corner. I mean, rough looking guy. His shirt was tore. He looked like food all over his clothes. And it just, I didn't know if the guy was all right, if he was just coming up with this, like buying 3 utility vehicles. And then he throws out, and I want to finance them. And I'm thinking, yeah, this guy's not going to get approved. And our financing was a revolving line of credit. If you're not familiar with that's like a credit card. And so financing on revolving is the hardest because it isn't secured by the equipment. And so this is like a $22,000 purchase and he's wanting to put it on a credit card. And I'm thinking, this is never going to fly.
Uh-oh.
This guy's wasting my time. So how do I qualify this guy? Inexperienced sales guy. I don't ask the questions. I look out in the parking lot. He's driving an old beater work truck, and I'm like, there ain't no way.
Yep.
So give him the application. And this is how bad it was. I didn't even look at the application. I didn't look at income. I didn't look at anything. I've already made a decision here in my head, thinking I know my customer.
Yep.
And so I go in. This was back in the day when you had to fax them in. So I fax in my credit app. I watch the credit app go through, and within 2 minutes, an auto approval comes out the other end.
Wow.
And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. Well, about a week goes by. I get all the utility vehicles in. I get them all ready. I've got him cleaned up. Here he rolls in, and now he's driving a Cadillac Escalade that's pearlized. And he gets out. He's dressed like in a business suit. You know, he comes up there. Come to find out, the guy owns a chain of restaurants that spans over 45 miles. So there's probably about 12 to 15 of these fast food chain that he owns. And the reason that he looked the way he did is because he had people call into work, and he was a successful guy. So he went down and worked a shift. It's a pizza chain. And so he had pizza dough and sauce all over him, and he just drove a work truck. And I made a decision before I even got to know the guy, before I even qualified the questions.
Yep. And I've learned too, through being in sales and dealing with people, there's, you really got to talk to them. You don't want to make assumptions, because there's times where some people try to be flashy and they really, they're not. And then some people, like you said, you assume that they maybe don't have the credit or whatever, and then they're the people that come in and pay cash for something. So that's just a sales example of doing that. But another one that I've really learned a whole lot about recently, Travis has been in the boys ministry for a long time at our church. So I started helping out. I've been helping out for about a year and a half, 2 years, somewhere like that. And I'm working with the younger boys. And so, sometimes I would think about, I tend to be a little bit more of a serious person and try to get kind of straight to the point a lot of times. And younger boys do not. You gotta, I didn't know my audience very well when I first started. And so I had to completely change my philosophy on that. And I had help along the way, but I tried to get up and give some lessons and be like, hey, if you guys learn this lesson, then we can do the game. And they didn't pay attention. So now sometimes if they don't pay attention, we do the game first. They get some, get some energy out, and then they want to pay attention. But kind of being flexible there. And if I went up there and talked to them like they're 20, then they're not going to understand it. But if I went and talked to them like they're 5 or 6 years old and they're 5 or 6 years old, then it's going to make a lot more sense to them. So that was an example I've faced recently where I had to learn to know my audience and really, shape the lessons and the teachings to that audience, to the boys.
I think of a lot of places like Bass Pro, who's their customer base. You like that cabiny feel when you walk in. Well, I've noticed putting things in my office help me get to know people. So you got a deer head hanging on the wall, guy comes in, oh man, I love deer hunt. Well, we've just made a connection and I'm getting to know this guy. And then I'm like, oh, you hunt your own land? Yeah, I got 50 acres. Now I know he's a landowner. He likes to hunt. We have a connection, something in common. I'm getting to know this guy.
Mm-hmm.
It's really helpful. Remember, make sure that you're asking the questions, make sure that you have the tools there. And we live in a world of technology. I've noticed that there was an app that you could purchase that actually monitored credit card activity. Obviously for security, it didn't give us any names or addresses, but it would tell us what areas, what counties these people lived in, their age group, their about kind of their income levels. That stuff's out there, and you can learn who your customer is. And I'm going to tell you, you might be surprised to find out who's buying your products. You might think you know your customer base. I remember years ago, talking, I think it was my dad that had picked a couple radio stations, and our guy was like, now is this based on what you listen to or what your customers are listening to? I remember talking about this, and you start studying, how do you learn this stuff? Well, you can do surveys. They're very helpful. We have 2 to 3 big country stations here locally for us. And what we found when we did a survey is that the people that were listening to one, they listened to all 3. They moved back and forth. And so that changed the way that we targeted our marketing, right? Mm-hmm. You got to know your demographic, your age group, the area that you're marketing to, and the things that they like so that you can relate to them.
Yep. Yeah, you could be advertising one thing or on a certain radio station, and if your customers don't listen to it, you're just flushing money, basically.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't be a good idea to take like my deer mount into like a PETA convention.
Yeah.
They probably wouldn't appreciate that, right?
Yep. Exactly.
So know your customer. Tyler, it's that time. Roll out the challenge for us.
It's that time. So we try to end every episode with the challenge. So this one requires a little more thinking, but I want you guys to really.
I'm in trouble.
Yeah, I want you guys to. I'll actually have something else to say. I was thinking, speaking on that, you made me think of it. I kind of made the joke of I've told some other guys, but if I could sell something to an engineer, that's like the most fulfilling sale that I have, because I've tried to talk to a lot of engineers before, and they're asking questions that are way over my head, and sometimes then if I talk to an engineer and the next customer comes in and I have those things on my mind that the engineer just asked, and I start explaining that stuff to the next guy, they're like, whoa, so it's a work in progress, but I just think you got to know who you're talking to.
I learned this real quick, and you reminded me when you were saying that, but I had a sales guy come in from a corporate company, and he was showing me some stuff, and I've taken this to heart. But before he would go out and call on a customer, or if he had a customer come in and he knew that they were making a larger purchase, like you talked in the last episode, it may not make sense if someone's just making coming in to buy a handheld tool or something, but they're making multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars purchase for a ranch or a farm or something. Well, he would pull them up on social media and he would run a report. He'd look at, okay, this guy works here. This is what he likes to do. You can learn a lot by looking at someone's social media feed. They put what they like. You can tell usually how they vote. You can tell the music that they like. You can tell what their family does for fun, and you can learn about that person. And we're not saying go out and stalk this person, but knowing who you're going to see, who you're talking to, gives you ground to relate to this person, and then also show them how the tools that you're selling will benefit them in their life.
Yep. That's right. So back to the thinking challenge. So this one will take a little bit of time to really think and fully grasp, but I want you guys to think of one person or group of people that you interact with on a daily basis. Now try to put yourself in that person's shoes. Okay, so take a little bit of time to think about that. And after thinking on this for a few minutes, come up with an effective way to communicate with them, considering the things that matter to them. So we gave you guys several examples. I know this is kind of a longer challenge, but I'd like you guys to share some examples of how that worked with you. And you can put those comments on our social media pages, and we can all kind of interact together. But that keeps us all helping each other. So that was your challenge for this episode, and now it's your time to execute.
That's right. It's time to execute.
Thank you for learning with us.
Join us next time as we reach for the impossible. I'm Travis.
And I'm Tyler.
And this is
Strategies for Success.